You are. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll be starting our program shortly, but in the meanwhile, to get you thinking about this afternoon's topic, why don't you type in the chat box something that you're growing from seed right now. So something that you're growing from seed, put it in the chat box so we can see what people are growing. Anyone out there growing from seed? Lettuce and spinach, great. Nothing yet, okay. Okay, tomatoes. Okay, so we've got some various people growing sunflowers, poppies, cauliflower, broccoli, so yeah, great. Tobacco. Jalapenos. So it looks like poppies. So people are doing some things from seed already. Nothing started yet, but cleaning up from the ice storm. I can understand that. Wow. Walla Walla onions. Great. Beets, carrots, cauliflower, turnips, lettuce, radishes. Great. So we'll be starting at noon, so in just 2 minutes. So in the meanwhile, we were just asking people if they are growing anything from seed to put that in the chat box. And we'll be starting in just 2 minutes. Great. Looks good. Thank you all for joining us for this talk. And just to mention that this is a second in our series of edible gardening seminar series, Starting Seeds. Our next online seminar will be on Monday, June 24th at 12 p.m. when we will discuss tips on how best to irrigate your edible garden. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. Brussels sprouts. I've never tried to grow Brussels sprouts, mainly because my husband doesn't like them. So I do though, but he's not a fan.
Lots of vegetables being grown. That's great.
Yeah, a lot of vegetables. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of perennials from seed also. But I've got I've got tomatoes, cucumbers, broccoli starts as well, right? Growing right now, or growing from seed. All right, it's noon, so let's get started. My name is Juliet Bender, and I'm a member of the OSU Lane County Master Gardeners. And I'd like to welcome you to our edible gardening seminar series, of which this is the second talk. All of these talks will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Questions will be handled at the end of the talk, but feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box, at any time. So not the chat box, but the Q&A box. Put your questions in, and I will coordinate those questions at the end. Also for today's talk, closed captioning is available. It can be turned on or off with the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So I think that's all the housekeeping issues. So let me introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Rose Ahern, who will talk about the basics of starting your own seeds. Using evidence-based information, Rose will describe the optimal conditions which will help those seeds become healthy, delicious vegetables. Rose has been an OSU Lane County Master Gardener since 2022. She is specialized in plant diagnostics and loves working in our plant clinic, where we answer questions from the public. She's been growing an edible organic vegetable garden for over 40 years. She relocated to Eugene in 2017 from New York and enjoys the longer growing season we have here in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, yeah.
So Rose, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Juliet. And I'd like to welcome everybody to our second edible gardening seminar this year. And I wish everybody a happy Earth Day. Today is Earth Day, and it's great to see so many people already growing from seed. So I just love this quote about a garden, how a garden is a grand teacher. It teaches patience and careful watchfulness. It teaches industry, and above all, it teaches entire trust. And we definitely have to trust nature. So when we're growing seeds, this is an important thing to remember. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the basics of starting your own seeds. And it seems like a lot of you probably already know most of this because you're already growing so many things from seeds. But we're going to go through mainly just the basics. And I'll be talking about vegetable seeds, but the information is applicable to flower seeds. But before I talk about planting these seeds, I just want to tell you a couple of the benefits that I think are really important about growing your own. It's healthier for you because you can obtain more nutrients from the fresh picked produce. And there's many scientific publications which back up this evidence. And it's especially healthy for improving your gut biome. And that helps to increase inflammation in our bodies. So that's, I think, is your number one reason for growing your own veggies. And secondly, you have the control over what you're doing, what you put in your soil and what you add to your environment. So it's all up to you. So you have the power. Third, it's definitely better for our environment. And you'll find that you're going to be inviting a lot more pollinators into your garden. Also, it's also an opportunity to try new foods. There's lots of different varieties of all these vegetables that we're going to be talking about. And most of them that are grown in, that you see in the supermarket are very commonplace and they're easy to grow. So that's why the big commercial farms grow them. But when you grow your own, you can try heritage varieties or things that you've never tried before. And really, it's so important to get connected with nature. And it's the opportunity to discover more of the wonders of nature, just working in the soil. You learn all about insects and worms and microorganisms, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so what are the objectives today? So I'd like you to learn about seeds and what are the optimal conditions which will help germinate those seeds. You'll learn how to choose your own seeds and the importance of knowing about those seeds by reading the seed packets and the seed catalogs. And you'll also try to learn how important it is that you plant the seed at the right time and with planting it correctly. And hopefully you'll also learn the importance of maintaining proper conditions to promote healthy seedlings. And you'll learn when you should be transplanting those seedlings into larger containers and when your seedling is ready to harden off or gets ready to go outside. And also which seeds need to be planted directly into the garden. I'll also be touching a little bit on the information about soil structure and also what nutrients are necessary to promote healthy growth of your vegetables. So we start with seeds. And what is a seed? So many seeds, so little time. All right. So a seed is a miniature plant called an embryo that can develop into a fully grown plant. This embryo comes pre-packaged with a food supply and the genetic information that is necessary for this seed to become its parent plant. The outer seed coat protects the embryo, and the cotyledon inside provides the initial nutrition for the embryo. The seed exists in a state of dormancy, and they're slowly using up their stored food reserves. And that's why it's important to check the dates on the seed packages. They can remain dormant for years, but some seeds have longer life expectancies than others. And these little unassuming powerhouses are just waiting for the ideal conditions to break dormancy and germinate. So your initial goal is to provide them an optimum environment for germination and seedling growth. So choosing seeds. Well, a good place to start is with seed catalogs. And I would recommend that you choose companies that are local to the Northwest, because they'll provide you the varieties that have been adapted to our area. The best catalogs will include lots of details about your plant, its color, its preference for sun or shade, its water requirements. It'll also tell you the mature height or the eventual spread or footprint of your plant. Another important piece of information is the cold hardiness zone for the plant. And each catalog uses different icons to tell you about the plant. So be sure to read the key, as the symbols are not the same in each catalog. You can also refer to just the seed packet itself. The seed packet will tell you how many days the seed will take to germinate, and it'll tell you, usually tells you what's the correct soil temperature to provide that germination. It tells you how deep to plant the seed, and you have to keep in mind that germination can vary quite a bit depending upon the temperature and the condition of the soil. So let's talk a little bit about those germination requirements. So the most important things are that the seed has a lightweight, airy mixture to germinate in. Garden soil is usually more compact than the soilless or the potting mixes that you can buy. So we don't recommend that you start your indoor seeds in regular garden soil. Using a moistened, soilless, lightweight potting mix, vermiculite or perlite, which helps to aerate the soil. And also they add usually coconut coir or peat moss. And these are other lightweight substances that can help to keep the soil airy and have lots of room for moisture to grow through. So you can use just about any container that you want, as long as it's clean and has good drainage. So if you're going to make your own containers, you want to make sure that they have holes at the bottom of them. If you use like a yogurt container or you use an old plastic pot, you want to make sure that you've got good drainage holes in there. You can just an important thing is make sure that the old containers are clean. So if you're reusing garden containers or you're using another type of plastic container, you want to make sure that you clean it well. And we recommend that you dip your clean container in a solution which is 1 part bleach and 10 parts water, just to give it a final disinfectant to help you prevent transmitting any type of diseases which may have been in the soil. So you want to make sure those containers are clean, have good drainage, and they're filled with that lightweight potting mix. And then you want to make sure that the temperature is correct. And this really has a huge effect on the germination of the seed. There's a really good article on an OSU publication about the correct soil temperature for starting your seeds. And it actually gives a comparison of how long it takes a seed to germinate in the correct soil temperature versus soil temperature that is too cold. And it can vary anything from like 3 days in the correct temperature to like 50 days in temperatures that's too cold. So it really is good to check that soil temperature. And really most important, or another most important germination requirement is moisture. Seeds will not germinate unless they become moistened. It's the water that actually softens that outer hard seed coat and helps that seed to break its dormancy. So keeping the proper moisture is super important. And you can maintain moisture by using a humidity dome or even just a simple plastic film that you cover your pot with. And lastly, super important is light. Most seeds need light to germinate. And once they have germinated, you've got to provide 12 to 16 hours a day of light to keep those little baby seedlings growing. Okay, so you want to check your seed packet to get the specific recommendations to plant your seed. You want to try to evenly space your seeds if possible within your pot. And of course, it depends on how large your pot you're using. Even in those small little cells that they sell, the plastic trays that you get with many different little cells, you should put at least 2 seeds per pot. Don't overcrowd them, and try to use like a little toothpick or just a small stick to separate your seeds. When you plant your seeds, as a reminder, water is the critical first step. So we recommend that you thoroughly moisten your starting soil mix first, and then place the seeds on top of the moistened mix. You can press them in a little bit depending upon the depth that's recommended on the seed packet, and then cover them lightly with your potting mix, or some folks just cover it with a little bit of vermiculite. But make sure you keep that medium moist. And this is why we recommend covering with that humidity dome or plastic. And once that seed germinates, you want to remove that plastic cover. Oh, and super important, don't forget to label those containers with the plant name and species. And if possible, put down the variety and also the date that you planted it. It's just cool to know, like you planted it on one day and it germinated like 3 or 5 days later. It's good to keep track of all of that. And as the seedlings grow, you'll want to make sure that you check also the harvest date for your vegetables. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, super important to have the proper heat to keep those little seedlings warm. And we recommend that you use a heat mat if your room temperature is not warm enough to keep your soil at a germination temperature. Most vegetable seeds require a germination temperature of about 65 to 70 degrees. And this is usually from, I would say, most of the warm temperature, the warm summer vegetables that you're going to grow. The cool summer vegetables that you're going to grow, like your broccolis and your peas and your lettuce, they don't need a temperature quite as warm, but they'll do really well if you plant them in that 65-degree temperature. They'll come up a lot faster. So the heat mat just goes underneath your tray of your plants, and it gently will heat that root zone 10 to 20 degrees above your ambient temperature. And I think it's closer to about 10 degrees over ambient when I've measured it. Most seeds also will require light to germinate, and we recommend that you actually use some form of artificial lighting. If you have a super sunny south-facing window, it is possible to grow your seedlings without artificial light. But if you use artificial light, and this is most commonly recommended are either the grow lights or the fluorescent, the cool fluorescent lights. And either of these will provide the right wavelength of light for the seeds to germinate. But I have to tell you, I've actually even grown them under incandescent lights. But light is super important, and keeping it on, as I put it, as close as I can to my seedlings at start time, so that they don't have to struggle to grow up and get leggy to reach that light. So initially, you want to keep your artificial light as close as you can to the container that you've planted those seeds in. Seedlings, as they grow, they're really going to try to stretch up to reach that light. So if you don't make them stretch so far, they'll grow a little bit stronger and they'll actually stay more compact. So what seedlings can you start indoors? So at this date, you actually can still start some seeds indoors because you're not going to plant them out in your garden until maybe late May or even the beginning of June. And seedlings that you can start indoors right now, the 22nd of April, you could start cucumbers, you can start squashes, you can start melons, because these are warm season crops. They will not tolerate a frost, so you can't put them outside anytime soon. Well, actually it is soon, because by May, the middle of May, we usually are frost free, but you got to watch the temperatures because you never can tell. So your cool season crops that you can actually start now are your broccolis, your cabbage, your kale, your lettuce, and your leeks. Now, if you've started them indoors already, you have transplants that are, 4 to 6 inches high, and they should be in your garden at this time right now. If you haven't started them, you can still start them indoors. And as soon as you have at least 2 sets of true leaves, you can actually start to harden them off and then put them in your garden. So this is a great time to be starting almost any kind of seed, except for tomatoes and peppers, eggplants, and tomatillos. Those long growing warm season vegetables actually needed to be started the end of March or the beginning of April. Although I know some people start them early March, but in this zone, we don't want to put those transplants in until the middle of May at the earliest. I usually put mine in around the Memorial Day because then you're really sure you're not going to get a frost. So once you've got your seedlings in and they're starting to grow, you really want to make sure that you keep them moist. And at this point, you may need to give them a little bit of fertilization. Okay, so if you're like me, you put too many seeds in each pot, and then you end up with a tangled mess of seedlings. So at some point, you have to decide what you're going to keep or how you're going to split these things up. So it really depends on what you're growing. If you're growing these are broccoli seedlings, and these seedlings you can clip and actually use them as sprouts that you can add to your salad. But if you don't want to add them to a salad and you want to try to save them, you've got to transplant them and put them into their own little pot. So when you want to break up seedlings like this, you've really got to make sure that the soil is super moist before you try to separate these seeds and put them in their own individual containers. And at this point, as you can see, we don't even have one pair of true leaves on these broccoli plants. These broccoli plants, most of them, some of them have the start of true leaves, but most of them just have the very initial leaves, which are called the seed leaves. And you really don't want to transplant anything until it has developed its true leaves. At least they recommend 2 pairs of leaves, but I've done it when there's only at least 1 pair of true leaves. So you would separate them and put them in their individual pot, and I still use potting soil or mixed with my seed starting mix if I've made anything. Sometimes I just use regular potting soil, and I'm going to continue to grow them indoors in their own individual pots and maybe put a little bit of fertilizer in at this point. So you want to optimally continue to grow them indoors until they're ready to start hardening off, which means that you're just going to gradually introduce the plants to the outside weather conditions. Okay, so here at this point, before we continue with the growing process, I just wanted to go over how important it is to know a little bit about what you're doing and to become familiarized with some of the basics. So here at OSU, we have an OSU extension catalog, which has a myriad of publications which will give you information about vegetable gardening. You can learn about soil temperature and how to improve your soil with nutrients and organic matter, and how to manage the soil pH. And you can find a lot of what those topics I just mentioned in the extension.oregonstateedu/gardening website. And we're going to give you some information in the chat box or in the Q&A. I think we're going to have some resources available for you there. So the basics that you really want to know are the first and last frost dates, because if you're growing warm season vegetables, you don't want to put them outside until that last frost date has passed. You need to know a little bit about your soil structure that's in your garden. So what type of soil you have makes a big difference to how easily the plant can grow. You need to know if you have an organic matter in your soil and what organic matter is actually. And the water requirements. Most vegetables need water, especially through the dry Eugene summers. You've got to provide daily, well, not daily, but you have to provide adequate moisture to the soil in order to maintain good root growth and allow the roots to take the nutrients up. Without available water, your roots don't have, it's not as easy for your roots to get the nutrients from the microorganisms up into your plant. So water requirements are really important, especially in this area. And one of the things you can do to help keep your soil moist is to mulch to protect that soil, and it'll help reduce water evaporation, and it'll also help to suppress weeds. I also listed on this slide the phone number of the OSU Extension Master Gardener Plant Clinic in Lane County. And you're welcome. If you live in Lane County, we would welcome your questions at our plant clinic. And if you don't live in Lane County, you can just look up whatever county you're in, their extension agent, and I'm sure that you'll be able to find out whether or not they have a plant clinic that can help you. So let's talk a little bit about the soil. Now, in this part of the Willamette Valley, most of our soils are clay or clay loam, unless you live right on the river, and then you'll have more of a riparian type of soil. But these clay soils are very hard when they're dry and very sticky when they're wet. So if you do have clay soil, you'll need to know when it's ready for you to actually start working in it. And at this time of the year, it's actually has dried out quite a bit because it hasn't been excessively rainy in the past week or two. But if you want to do a little soil test, you just take a little bit of soil in your hand and you rub it back and forth. And if you can make a snake out of that soil without it breaking, your soil is still too moist to work in. But if you rub that soil together and it doesn't make a big, long snake like Play-Doh, it breaks up, then your soil's probably ready to start planting in. So once your soil has dried out a little bit, it's easier for that new transplant or a seed, if you're going to be putting seeds in, to actually, it'll have a much easier environment for its roots to work its way into your soil. Now, if you don't have clay soil and you have sandy soil, it's usually much easier to start working that in the spring, but you're going to need to remember that you're going to have to more frequently water that type of soil. And the bottom line is that all soils will benefit from the addition of organic matter. And organic matter can be from compost that you put into your soil, or you can work in garden leaves. You want to be careful, though, that anything that you're working in isn't overly wet, especially at this time of the year. So you want to make sure that what you're putting organically into your soil is ready to be incorporated into your soil. Something else that makes soil easier to work in is if you have a raised bed, and you don't have to have a raised bed that's made out of wood. You can actually just mound soil up. You can mound the dirt up to about 12 inches deep and maybe 3 to 4 feet wide. And make your bed or the length is up to you. And you want to prepare that region with your fertilizer and your organic matter, and make your soil as airy and as open as possible so that you have the optimal environment for either a seed that you've directly put in the garden or your transplant to get a good, healthy start. So which seeds can be directly planted into the garden right now? You can still put peas in. I know a lot of people start their peas in March, but it's definitely not too late to put peas in. You can put radishes in now. You can put beet seeds in, carrot seeds, turnips. You can do parsley, onions, Swiss chard, spinach, and lettuce. And you can probably get your parsley to germinate quicker if you soak your seeds for about 24 to 48 hours before you put them into the soil. Parsley takes quite a while to germinate, but you can give it a little boost by actually soaking the seeds. And I've actually spoken to other master gardeners who soak their peas and they soak their beans. I wouldn't put beans in just yet because the soil probably is still a little too cold for your snap beans to start growing. For the green beans and the bush beans, I would probably wait until the middle of May before putting in those seeds. But all the other seeds that I mentioned can go in right now. And this paper I have up here, Dates for Planting Vegetables in Oregon, comes from an OSU Extension catalog publication, and it's 871. It's Growing Vegetables in Oregon, and that's great. That's a really wonderful resource that we provide for you to check out all the different vegetables that you're growing for the optimal dates and temperatures that you should be growing them in. And then, of course, like you had to thin out your seedlings that you planted in your indoors, you've also got to thin out the direct seeded plants that you put outdoors. So when you plant your beets and you plant your carrots and your turnips, especially the root crops, it's really important that an individual plant will have enough room to grow. The beet seed is interesting because it actually, one seed will grow 2 plants. And I've kept both plants together, if they both come up. And it's okay, but you've got to make sure that you give each seed at least 4 to 5 inches between seeds. And I don't plant them 4 to 5 inches. I plant my seeds every inch so that I am going to be sure that when I thin them, I'll have every 4 or 5 inches, I'll have a beet plant. Carrots is pretty much the same way. And this photo actually shows somebody thinning carrot seedlings. You plant in a line, you plant your seeds close to each other, because carrot seeds are really tiny. So it's really difficult to plant like one seed every 5 inches. You'd really want to plant, just go down the row and distribute your seeds. And then as those seedlings come up, you can just take a little scissor and clip so that each carrot has at least 2 to 3 inches in between it. Turnips, of course, will need a little more space in between. But mostly anything that you plant, you want to make sure that you provide them enough space so they can grow to their mature size. And that size, that sometimes they refer to that as their footprint. So when you're putting in your seeds, you're going to plant thickly but thin to the footprint. When you're planting your transplants in the garden, you can space them to the footprint. So a tomato plant that might grow to be 4 to 5 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, you need to provide enough room for each individual plant when you're putting those transplants in. And some people plant kind of close together, but if you allow room for the plant to grow, you'll provide more air. It won't have so much competition for the roots, and it'll actually have less competition for the nutrients. So you're actually giving each individual plant the best start that you can. And another thing about if you plant the plants too close, they can tend to be misshapen. And that's especially your carrots and your beets. But also it's harder for them to actually facilitate growth because they're in competition with other plants. And if you provide them enough room to grow, then they'll be healthier. And healthier plants are not as easy a target for diseases and for pests like slugs and cabbage moths and everything, all those things that we have so much fun with in the garden. Okay, all right, so now you've got to know how to keep those plants healthy by providing the right nutrition for them. So most gardeners are aware of the pH of their soil, how that actually makes it easier for, if the soil is the correct pH for the range that that vegetable needs to grow in, it has the correct environment for the roots to take up the nutrients that it needs. So in order to know what your pH is, though, you should get a soil test, which we provide at OSU Extension 3 times a year. Well, 3 times in the spring and twice in the fall, and are at the Lane County OSU Extension. Our last spring soil collection is coming up on May 4th, and that's at 1 to 4 p.m. But getting back to the soil. Okay, so what are the recommendations for nutrition for your soil? Nitrogen is the most essential component for plant growth. So all of the nutrients that are listed in your fertilizer, there's usually 3 numbers that you see initially. And the first number is always going to be nitrogen. So if there's a recommendation that you use a balanced fertilizer for your plants, that would mean that the numbers would be the same, like 10, 10, 10 or 8, 8, 8. And the first number is for nitrogen. The second number is for phosphorus. And the third number is for potassium. And potassium and is really necessary to help prevent to maintain a healthy immune system in your plant, and it helps to promote strong root growth, which helps the plant to take up the nutrients that it needs. Phosphorus helps the plant's overall reproductive system, and it's really important for flowering and fruiting. And this is important when you're growing peppers and you're growing tomatoes, because you're growing these plants for their fruit. Lettuce, and you're actually growing for the leaves. Broccoli, you're growing more for the buds and the flowers. But when you're growing for fruit, you really have to have that phosphorus available. And what is most gardeners will actually stop using any fertilizer with nitrogen at the time that they're trying to promote fruit and fruit growth for their plants. So initially you need the nitrogen for the leaves, because nitrogen is so important for those leaves to be able to produce photosynthesis. And without photosynthesis, the plant can't produce the necessary carbohydrates that it needs to nourish roots. So initially, you've got to have the nitrogen there. And then the phosphorus comes later in the growing season when you want to have really healthy fruit. And the potassium and the calcium are also just important macronutrients to help sustain the health of your plant. And if you've ever had blossom end rot on the bottom of your tomatoes or your squashes, that's usually because of a lack of calcium. But I just found out that it really matters about the water and the pH in your soil. It's not just adding more calcium will actually stop blossom end rot. You've got to have the right conditions and the right pH for that calcium to get into those roots. So consistent watering is really super important, and checking that the pH of your soil is favorable to that plant that you're growing. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about everything. So I want to emphasize here that you take a look at some of the references from OSU, and the important ones that I really, really highly recommend is Growing Oregon Vegetables, and that's extension document 871. And then there's a document called Growing Your Own, which is really a wonderful PDF that you can download, and it has all the information that you need for growing a really healthy vegetable garden. Okay, so your optimal conditions for starting these seeds. So for germination and seedling growth, you've got to have a light, airy potting mix. You can use vermiculite or perlite to keep it nice and airy. You want to cover the seeds only as specified by the seed packet, so don't plant it too deep. Want to make sure you use clean containers with good drainage. You want to have that nice warm soil temperature, which will coddle your little baby seed and it can help it to break dormancy. You also need to remember that the warmth is needed, and you can use the heat mat, And for growing indoors, you want to have an ambient temperature of about 70 degrees to promote that seedling growth. You want to give your seedlings 12 to 16 hours a day of light. And super important is you've got to keep that soil moist, not soaked, but maintain that humidity, not just for the seed to germinate, but also to maintain the moisture that a young seedling needs. And I use a mister almost every day on my plants just to keep everything moist, especially when they're growing indoors and our heat dries out the climate. You've got to keep those little babies moist. You're going to thin your seedlings as needed, and you're going to pot them into larger containers as they get bigger. And after you've got them in their own individual pot, you're going to add a little fertilizer. And at this point, I usually use a diluted liquid fertilizer. I use fish emulsion, but it can be smelly. So just a word of caution if you're going to use fish emulsion in the house. It does leave a little bit of an odor, but the plants love it. You want to make sure that you're going to maintain that soil moisture and treat them with the warmth and the light that those seedlings need. Keeping your grow lights close to the seedlings so they don't become all leggy. As your seedlings grow and they're ready to go outside to start to get used to an outside environment, you've got to harden them off slowly by exposing them to outdoor temperatures. And some recommend like for an hour a day start and then work it longer as they seem to tolerate. But it really depends on the outdoor temperature. I mean, if we're having freezing temperatures, even though you want to put your plants out to harden them off, you've got to actually be aware of the temperature that you're putting them out into. So you're not going to take them from a room that's been 70 degrees and put them into, 38 or 40 degrees. You've got to actually go pretty gradually with them so that you don't shock them. You want to make sure that you're prepared your garden plot. Make sure that the soil is workable and you fertilized it and added organic matter to help promote microorganism growth and increase the fertilization of your soil. And you want to transplant into the garden only when that soil and air temperature will support growth. And you want to direct seed in the garden, your peas, your beans, your carrots, spinach, Swiss chard, onions, beets, and squash. I have had luck with Swiss chard growing initially in containers and then transplanting outside. And last year, someone gave me beet seedlings, which actually transplanted really well. So the recommendation is usually to put those the beets and other root vegetables directly in as seeds, but you can do a little experiment and try for yourself. If you plant these seeds in a pot and you have like control over them, you plant them in your house or in a protected area outside or the garage, and you're watching them, you actually can almost jump start the germination a little bit by starting them indoors. And then again, don't put them, if you are going to use beets or Swiss chard, make sure you've got true leaves before you plant them out in your garden. And I'd wait till they were like at least 3 to 4 inches high before I transplanted them. And in our dry Willamette Valley summers, you have got to make sure that you provide water. And you can do it from hand watering or soaker hoses or drip irrigation, but the key is to make it consistent. And we're going to be having another edible gardening seminar coming up soon on irrigation, so be sure to watch that too. Okay, so I just wanted to throw in a little bit of another plug for growing your own. I love this quote from Jamie Oliver, who said, "Real food doesn't have ingredients. Real food is ingredients." And that's, I think vegetables are one of the main ways that humanity has survived, by getting all its nutrients. So I think it's really great that we encourage everyone to grow something. And I love these books by Michael Pollan, The Omnivore's Dilemma and Food Rules. And they're just good, written, easy to understand stories about why it's so important for us in today's society to eat real food. And the real food that you get right out of your own garden is the best food you could have. And this other book by Thor Hansen, The Triumph of Seeds, is another delightful story. If you are so intrigued by seeds the way I am, you'll really enjoy this book. It just talks about the history of seeds and how they've shaped human cultures and history itself. So here's all the resources, which I think that we're putting up into the Q&A for you, so that you can find these links and get some of the information which is available at OSU. But I also have some information from the Washington State University, and also from I think I put NPI and NIH there. I might not have. Okay, but if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A now. And I think we have some time to take your questions. So thank you for watching this, and let's get growing.
Okay, thanks, Rose. I appreciate it. That was a wonderful talk. Yes, we do have a number of questions in the chat, in the Q&A boxes, so let me get to those. First one is, any ideas about rats eating veggies in the garden, effective protective coverings?
Wow, rats in the garden. I haven't had any problem with that here in Eugene.
I would probably suggest mesh, something pretty tight, so you'd have to, so the rats don't get through it. Not chicken wire, but something pretty tight that you'd have to put around your vegetable garden, raised bed or whatever, so they can't get in.
Wow.
Or maybe a covering over the top too, so they don't climb it.
Yeah.
The next question is, my tomatoes germinated well, but didn't grow past the cotyledon stage. Any ideas why? I've heard I shouldn't fertilize until the first two leaves appear. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, you don't need any fertilizer. And that may be why, if you put fertilizer in your soil when you were just planting your seeds, it might have been a nutrient overload for the seeds. I think that's probably my best guess for that. I don't know why though. They usually, once they started growing, they usually continue, but it could have been the starting mix too. I'm not sure.
And also light, making sure there's enough light so that they keep growing. So, and light close to the germinated plants.
Yeah.
Next question, do you leave the heat mat on under the plants after they have sprouted? If so, for how long do you leave it on?
I only leave it on under peppers because peppers really like warm soil. But I even once my tomatoes have sprouted, they don't need a heat mat anymore. And I've talked to other master gardeners who, as soon as they have true leaves, one pair of true leaves, the heat mat comes out. So as long as you have ambient temperature of at least, I would say 68 to 70 degrees, you can probably remove that heat mat.
Okay, the next question, fertilize after planting. I did it with a foliar fertilizer and I burned my purple tomatillas. Could you recommend a good and safe fertilizer?
Initially, I would just use fish emulsion. That's a 5-1-1. So it's heavy on the nitrogen and not much phosphorus or potassium. So, and I follow the recommendations for seedlings and small plants. And I believe it's only 1 tablespoon per gallon at that point. So, and then you would go to 2 tablespoons per gallon when they get a little bit bigger. But if you fertilize too much, you definitely are going to burn those plants.
Next question, I keep my grow lights set up in the basement. It's about 60 degrees down there. Does ambient temperature matter or only soil temperature?
I think it really depends on what you're growing. If you're growing brassicas, it would be fine. But it'll just take longer. And 60, nothing's going to die at 60 because you're not going to freeze the plant. It's just that it won't be optimum. Like it's like, the vascular system works at better when you're warmer. So that's the same thing in a plant. But I don't think that would make a big difference, but I'm not 100% sure.
I agree. I think it would just be that things wouldn't grow as fast and produce as quickly as it would at 60 degrees or 70 degrees. Next question, I have an old straw bale from last fall. Is that good to add to our raised bed garden?
As a mulch, you can certainly do that, like to mulch around your plants. You want to do that now. And then at the end of the year, you could actually try to work it into your garden. I wouldn't put straw in the soil now, though. It won't decompose fast enough. And but you could certainly use it in your garden as a mulch, as a top, to protect against water loss.
Yes. Next question, can you soak all types of seeds to boost germination, or is it detrimental to some seeds?
No, it's not detrimental. I mean, a seed won't germinate without water. It's a question, like you don't really need to soak lettuce seeds at all. But like I've experimented, I've tried to soak a lot of different seeds. I have to say, it didn't work so well with cucumbers for some reason. I don't know why, but any other seed that I've soaked, I was able to, and also it didn't work with squash. But I think it depends on the seed coat, to be honest with you, but it won't harm a seed because a seed won't germinate without moisture.
Right. Next question, what's something I could plant between garlic as it matures?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it depends how far you've planted your garlic apart. I mean, you could probably put lettuce in between.
Yes.
But I got plant my garlic pretty close together and I don't put anything in between. So,
yeah, I don't either, but I think lettuce or spinach or one of those could work well.
I would think so too. And they're quick growing, so I think that would probably be your best choice.
Or even radishes, probably. Radishes could work well too.
They might. It's worth an experiment.
Yeah. If planting seeds in raised bed, no fertilizer until leaves?
Planting seeds in, well, once you're in the garden, it's different. You know, you ideally you have fertilized your soil before you even put anything into it. You know, and we actually recommend that you start your fertilization for your garden bed the previous fall. But it depends what kind of fertilizer I think you're going to use. Like there's slow acting, granular fertilizer that you can actually add to your soil before you've planted your seeds. So in the soil, it's different than when you're planting in containers. I don't know. What do you think, Juliet?
Yeah, I think you can. I would not have a problem with that. I put fertilizer in from the very beginning when I put my soil in, and I fertilize my raised beds immediately before I plant anything. So
Okay.
yeah, not a
Mhm.
problem.
But
Two last questions. When do you typically transplant your tomatoes outside in Willamette Valley? Great question.
I think you've got to look at your like 10-day weather forecast. And if around the 15th of May, well, they actually say our last frost date is the end of April, but we can get a frost after that. So I would say by Mother's Day, start looking at the 10-day forecast. And if there's a forecast for 36 degrees or less, you don't want to put anything out. So I usually wait till Memorial Day and put my tomatoes out, and they do fine, at that point. This year I might put them out sooner because my plants are so big already and they're busting out of the pots. So I may try putting them out on like Mother's Day this year, but I think you've got to just really watch the temperature to be sure that you're not going to get a frost.
Yeah, I usually don't put mine out until at least after the 15th. And some people were asking if it really isn't too late to plant tomato seeds, because you still got a month before the tomatoes are going to go in the ground outside. So
I think, yeah, I think you've got to just look at your harvest, like how
yeah,
many days to harvest. And there
yeah,
are some fast growing varieties. So if you've got
right.
a harvest that's on like 75 or 60 days or something, sure,
Right.
you can do the seeds.
Yeah, so it's not too late yet, but you need to get them in, get the seeds planted now.
Today.
Today. So, and then the last question is, what do you recommend about adding beneficials to pre-treat the seeds for bacteria?
Oh, for bean seeds, yeah, you can like soak your seeds. I have never done it, but I have had a lot of friends who swear by it so that it prevents different types of, I'm not sure if it's funguses or bacteria, but I've never had any problems with bean seeds. Beans usually grow really easily. So, but I know that for the peas and the beans, there are inoculates that you can use before you plant the seeds. I would read up a little bit on it and see.
There's one last question here in the chat. Any comments on molding during germination?
Yeah, that's too much water.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's the moisture is tricky. It really is.
Tricky.
It depends on your ambient temperature. Depends on like if you've got them in a garage and the door is opening and closing. I mean, there's so many different variables. Just keep checking it, and you need moist but not soaked. So you have to really watch your babies.
And
So,
sometimes if a fan might work to make them a
yeah.
little stronger.
Oh,
So
that's a good idea. Actually, yeah, I saw something recently about having the fan like to keep the air moving. Yeah,
to keep the air moving too. That
Mhm.
that could be something to help as well. So
right.
yeah, it can be trial and error, but it
Mhm.
does work.
Yes, yeah, totally. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Rose, and thank all of
Okay.
you for joining
Yeah,
us.
thank you all. All
There
right.
have been a lot of thank yous for you, Rose. The people have
Okay.
loved the presentation. So
Oh, great. Okay, thanks for coming. And see you at the next edible gardening seminar. Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye.